You're listening to #Impact, a podcast about stuff that matters. I am Regina Larco, and it is my honor to welcome back Juhi Gangaramani as our guest host of this episode. In our last episode, you already heard Juhi talk to Adelaide about normalizing mental health conversations. If you have missed that one, make sure to check it out as well. This time around, we are talking about a topic that has, in the history of our podcast here, been a very popular one. And that is the topic of fashion and sustainability, how these two tie together, the challenges within it, and we found an amazing guest that can bring a lot of light and fresh perspectives to this conversation. It is, of course, the one and only Anna Rönngard, and you will learn what traceability is and how it can help achieve sustainability. You will also hear them talk about the importance of change management in achieving sustainability, and you'll get to know Anna as well. So I know you are in for a treat. Enjoy. And now I hand over the mic to Juhi.
Hi, #Impact listeners. My name is Juhi Gangaramani, and I am a guest host on #Impact this season. Today's guest has a large role in the sustainable development sector and is incredibly inspiring to me and is really motivated for change. So I'd like to introduce Anna Rönngard. Anna is a Swedish entrepreneur whose firm focuses on the garment industry and its supply chain. She has very valuable roots and experience in China and Hong Kong, and she uses that knowledge in sustainability to help implement really vital change in the companies and industries that they work in. And in this episode, we're going to learn a bit more about Anna's journey, her company, and just her thoughts on visibility in this industry. So welcome, Anna.
Hi, thank you so much, Juhi. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad that I finally have the opportunity to talk with you because I just have so many questions. But I'll just dive in and ask first how your journey began into sustainability and in the fashion industry.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was a while ago now. I think it was about 15 years ago or something, and I was in China. I didn't really have a very clear plan that I wanted to work with sustainability or human rights as it started with, or labor rights as it started with. I kind of just got into it in a while, in a bit. I was living in Shanghai at the time, and I had studied Mandarin and for a number of years. I'd been in Beijing, and at this time I was in Shanghai working for a Dutch company at the time. And a friend of mine was working for H&M, and he was asking me if I wanted to come and join him and his team because they needed a Swedish person. They needed someone who kind of had the right background and understanding of labor rights. And I mean, as a Swede, we have a pretty strong tradition and background with working with labor rights. So they needed someone who kind of understood that sphere and that context, and also someone that could speak Chinese and Mandarin to the factory management and the factory owners. So they brought me in and hired me as a code of conduct auditor, it was called at that time. And that was really the beginning, I think you can say, into what I called sustainability, because sustainability can be, it's a pretty wide and broad concept, but for me, it includes both the people aspect and the planet aspect.
Absolutely. And I love how you talk a lot about labor rights and social aspects, because that really intertwines a lot to do with how we look at how our clothes are made. And I think it's a really vital part that people leave out when they observe the whole supply chain and they observe how fast fashion functions. Like, it's not just to do with the actual material and the production of material itself, but it's how it's made, who made it. And I think that a lot of that is really important. So how do you, personally, when you talk about labor rights to other people, do you feel like people are aware of this kind of issue, or they kind of just know generally about it? How is it receiving sort of questions about this from others?
Yeah, I think in particular the labor rights and the responsibility in a way that brands will have in when it comes to the production of clothes has been on the radar for many people for a long time. It started already in the 90s when there was a lot of crisis for many brands, I think you can say, or scandals that had to do with child labor and also forced labor. And I think the whole industry in a way is tainted from those days still to this day. So of course that is on a lot of people's mind, and I think that for a long time that was the only question that I would ever get when I said that I was working for a big brand. People would say that, oh, but they have child labor in their production, don't they? And things like that. So I think in general, people are fairly well aware, or people have an opinion at least about, about these topics. Absolutely.
Yeah, of course. And I think like we're not always like we always see what comes in the news and the media first, and immediately we have a reaction to it. But there's so many companies that are overlooked that do really great work. So kind of want to segue into discussing your company, AMRA, of which you're the CEO. I think you said it began in 2020. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So I left the kind of the corporate world in a way just before COVID hit the whole world, because I was at the point in my life when I knew I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to do something for myself and for my own benefit in a way. So I started my own company AMRA in 2020, in March 2020. So that was just before the whole COVID started. And to be honest with you, I think I was in a little bit of a searching phase at first, but I always had the idea and I always had a kind of conviction that I wanted to work with people, and I wanted to work with the empowerment of people, which is why nowadays I focus a lot on the empowerment of the people that are actually doing the work within different companies. So I work with the leaders, usually the sustainability leaders, on how to drive and how to implement sustainability and also traceability in their organizations.
You mentioned the term traceability, and for our listeners who aren't really sure of what that means, could you help give us a little example or a definition?
Yeah, absolutely. So traceability, I think, is a very important aspect of achieving sustainability and achieving a more responsible supply chain, just in general, because traceability, for me anyway, it means visibility. So it means that when you have a traceable supply chain, you also have a visible supply chain, and that means that you know where the raw material came from, because we also have to remember that the production cycle of a garment is a very long and windy kind of chain, and it is like a black hole to most brands and companies that are producing a t-shirt. They don't know where exactly the cotton came from or how the yarn was made, and so forth, because inherently it's a very difficult chain to look into, because it's very global. You will get the cotton maybe from Turkey, and then you will have a trader in Japan, and then you will have a spinning mill in Indonesia, and you will then have the fabric mill in Bangladesh, and you will have the garment maker in China. I mean, and that's just a short example of that whole chain. Then you will have dyeing facilities and all of these things in between as well. So I think that is what traceability is, to achieve a visibility into that whole chain. Where did the raw material come from, and all of the different players and actors along the way.
Yeah. Do you find that, like, because you mentioned so many different countries and so many different jobs and roles that people take on, do you find that it's difficult for you to keep a track of sometimes? Because I know that I definitely lost track of all the little parts of the supply chain. Do you find that it's difficult for you to keep track of, or make sure that every aspect is held accountable?
Yeah, I mean that is a task, absolutely, to keep track of these things. And I mean, there are, of course, today there are so many digital solutions and support as well for brands and for retailers to help them keep track of these things. But it's I mean, once you know the supply chain, when you know the structure of the supply chain, I think it's fairly easy to understand the different parts of it. The challenge lays in understanding who is involved, who was involved in the making and in the production of it. So yeah, that is definitely a challenge, I would say, for all of us working with this.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I can't even imagine. And I also wanted to ask a bit about if there are any kind of examples or any experiences that you've had where it's been a notable moment in your career for you to be able to say, like, that was an important part of focusing on like traceability or sustainability. Like, were there any moments for you that kind of defined your career or maybe define the industry that you felt you were a part of?
For me personally, I've always worked in the first tier of the supply chain, so to say. And I think we as an industry have focused a lot on the first tier, which has been the garment making. That's where I started as a code of conduct auditor as well. I started auditing these factories, the factories that are actually making the garments. And of course, a lot of the human rights and the labor rights violation will happen in that part of the whole production. But I think as we grew more mature in the industry, we also everyone realized that a lot of especially the environmental footprint of the making of a garment is actually not in that sector. It's further upstream, as we call it. So it's like further back or further upstream in the supply chain. And I think when we as an industry started realizing that, we also realized that, okay, then we have to understand where these things happen. Like when you spin a yarn, for example, that's a very energy intensive process. Or when you wash and dye a fabric, that's also very high intensity, and there is a risk for using a lot of chemicals. And when you harvest and grow the cotton, you use a lot of water and so forth. So when we realized that here, and there is also, of course, a lot of social risks along the chain as well. And when we realized that, we also realized the need of working to achieve a more traceable and more visible supply chain for us as an industry. And for me, it has been a slow process in a way. In my role, in my different roles that I had within the H&M group, I was always exposed to this one way or the other, and it started with us taking a step beyond the tier one, and we said, okay, what if we start looking at the tier two, the ones that are actually making the fabric, and we started mapping that and trying to create the landscape, or trying to visualize the landscape of what it looked like. And then I also just wanted to say that the challenge is not just to create the visibility there. The challenge then comes with, how do you then address these risks that you will have in the different parts of the supply chain? So how do you address a fabric mill that maybe is not your direct business partner? You are making business with the tier one, but the garment maker is making business with the tier two. How do you make sure that fabric mill uses more energy efficient methods and so forth? So I think that there wasn't like one specific moment like that. It was more a transition.
Yeah. And it seems like, from what I'm understanding, it seems like it's hard to go through all the tiers of the supply chain and make sure that everyone's kind of doing their part and they're being held accountable. Do you find that like a lot of people don't hold themselves accountable, or do you find that it's easier to kind of be able to tell people what needs to be done, how it needs to be fixed, and that they hold themselves accountable? Or do you find that that's a bit more difficult for people in this industry?
Yeah, so I think that I think it all comes down to awareness and awareness raising. So I mean, of course, we can blame each other for not for not doing the right thing or not wanting to do the right thing, and so forth. And of course, there will be people that will always try to take the easy way out and to cheat and so forth. But I think in general, what it comes down to is that we need to change the awareness, and we need to change the behavior of everyone that is involved, and that's a long process. It doesn't just happen overnight, and as a brand you need to invest a lot in this changed behavior and this awareness raising, and it doesn't work just going out and telling your partners, your business partners, or your indirect business partner for that matter, because that's what it's going to be. Once you start having a more traceable supply chain, you're going to have to deal with a lot of indirect business partners, and going out and telling them what to do and just telling them what to do. I don't believe in that. I never really been a fan of that. That is how we worked back in the days when I was an auditor. We would like go out and we would tell the suppliers what to do. But that was also a transition for us, where we kind of slowly but steadily moved into a more partnership approach, where we would co-create the solutions with our suppliers rather than just telling them what to do and not to do. So I believe in that. I believe in partnership and shared ownership of these issues if we want to be successful.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a more efficient way to actually work together rather than being able to like just dish out orders and tell people exactly what to do. And it's hard to like make sure that things are carried out. But I feel like if people are working together and they're working towards a solution as a part of a team, it makes it a lot more easier for there to be visibility and for there to be actual change. I remember we talked about this in a previous conversation. We also talked about change management. If you could help define that for our listeners.
Absolutely. And I wanted to make that comment now in the conversation that we just had, that I think that is why change management is so important for all of us, both internally but also externally, because change management is really about how do you change the behavior of people. So usually you will connect change management with a project management, a change management, whereas the project is much more on the kind of system changes that you need to achieve. You will have a starting and ending date. It will be much more structured, where you have the change management is about how do you approach the people that is going to be affected by this change, and how do you make sure that they change their behavior. And that is relevant when it comes to driving sustainability internally in an organization, because you don't want to have just a siloed sustainability department that does everything that kind of comes under the label of sustainability. You want the whole organization to take an ownership of sustainability. And that is why change management in an organization becomes important. But also what we just talked about, change management in the supply chain, is very important as well, because like you said, you don't want to just dish out orders to people. We all know I am like that anyway. I don't like when people just tell me what to do, and I haven't been part of creating that way of doing it. I like to be part of the process. That is when I'm mostly motivated to actually do things. So that goes for the internal people that we want people in in the design team to do things. You don't want to have the sustainability to just go and tell them what to do. And exactly the same thing works for the suppliers and the supply chain. You don't want to just like go and tell them, now you have to do this and this. It will never create that ownership that you need, and that is going to create a long lasting effect.
I think that has a lot to do with also how workers feel. Like you talked a lot about their involvement and being able to say, like, I created this and I had a part and I made an actual impact. So I think it has a lot to do with the self-esteem of workers and ensuring that everyone did contribute and everyone can actually say that, yes, I have actually implemented this and we're working together. And I feel like it not only creates a stronger individual, but a stronger team, a stronger company. That's, I feel like, how large corporations should be functioning, not just from just dealing out orders, but from everyone being able to say, like, yes, I had a hand in creating this. So I think that's a really great point that you make. So next, I'd actually like to I collected a few questions from youth who are interested about the industry and had a few anecdotes and just had queries about what you do. So if it's okay, I'll give you the first question.
Yes, please.
So the first question that I got was, how do you think social media can impact how we create transparency of full supply chains? As you mentioned before, we talked a bit about how we look at certain parts of the supply chain and how it makes it a bit more easier to track because of the digital age. So how do you think that social media can kind of play into that?
Yeah, I think absolutely media just in general and social media as well is the communication tool to disclose this information to the public. So I believe it plays a crucial role, and I'm not a communicator in that sense. Like, I don't know exactly how you can leverage social media, but I think that there's so many opportunities to take the information that you kind of uncover when you're doing your traceability work, because I'm very focused on how do you find the information as a company, like how do you make sure that you uncover that information, and then which information you choose to then be transparent with, I think is that's up to the company. But there is, of course, a lot of potential here to create loyalty and trust from consumers if you choose to be transparent with that information. And there I see that social media is obviously the tool to do that in these days.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like as a part of being a part of Generation Z, I see a lot of people my age who specifically search out companies who are a bit more open and are willing to show how their process is, how their fabric is made, who makes it. Like, we search out a lot of these companies because we want more transparency and we want to be able to create a better environment where sustainability is widely accepted, not just from the environmental aspect, but from the social aspect, as you talked about earlier. The next question, I think, is a great question because this is kind of based in a conversation that we had earlier. So the question is, do you find that mature companies are less or more resistant to changing their methods of production or visibility?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't call it resistant. I think that a lot of, I mean, then what is a company? I mean, a company is the people, right? The people that works within that company. And I believe that a lot of the mature companies as well, they want to change. I mean, they have the ambition to change, but it's much harder for them. It's much harder for a mature company to change than for a newly started company that maybe went into business with a more sustainable mindset. Maybe they had another vision to start with, and they could set their structures to begin with in another way. Changing a mature and also usually a pretty large company is just harder. And that is why I keep coming back to change management as well, because I really think it's the key to drive change in these more mature companies that are, they're pretty stuck in a way of working, and they have so many dependencies on each other. So even though one department maybe want to change, and they will change one way of working on one IT system or whatever, they are connected to this other part of the organization that maybe is not as far ahead as they are, and for all of that to sync smoothly, it's a challenge. So I mean, of course there are brands out there and retailers that have no intention to change whatsoever, but but I believe the majority anyway today have an ambition to change, and I hope so anyway. But it's not so easy for them, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, like you said, the larger the company, like, it depends on how long they've been around, like their staff, like you're really going back to the origin and how they started their company. Like, you're starting all the way from there and kind of working your way up to where they are in the present. So that's a really good point. So this next question is, working in different parts of the world, how did you see labor rights either being endorsed or abandoned? So this is, again, kind of referring more to the accountability aspect.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think you will always meet people, different kind of employers, as you move around and you meet different factory owners and so on. Some will be much more progressive and also more responsible in a way, and they will have their own conviction that taking care of their workers in a good way is is smart for their business. It's business smart to do that as well. But not everyone understands that. And I started out pretty early on. I mean, this was 15 years ago. At that time, labor rights and like caring for your workers and so forth maybe wasn't that it wasn't such a top of mind maybe, or something like that for the suppliers. And of course we would see many of them was trying to show us one part of the one part, or they were trying to show us one side, and it wasn't actually the correct side. So at that time, I mean, I think a lot of things have changed as well, and I think brands have maybe become more and more. They're more taking care of choosing the right suppliers and choosing the ones that actually do care about this and share their values as well. But in a way, I also believe that this whole auditing methodologies that we're using in the industry is not the best way of doing it. I mean, if you look at a country like Sweden, for example, we don't have the buyers auditing the the sellers. We have a governmental organization auditing everyone that is an employer in a way, so it's much more governmental and authority led rather than a buyer led method and process, which I believe is the only way to actually make a real impact. If you want to have a real impact on workers' rights, and if you really want the labor law to be enforced, it needs to be enforced by the authorities and not by small groups, specific some small buyers here and there in certain areas, in certain factories, like trying to enforce a labor law. So that is why I think, as long as we don't have that authority-led implementation, we're always going to have violations and scandals when it comes to labor rights.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about how it was more authority and organization led in Sweden. How did you see this in China and in Hong Kong?
Well, in China, I mean, to be frank with you, there isn't really that type of oversight, in my experience anyway, from back then. I mean, I'm sure that they are a country under constant development, right? So I'm sure that these are things that they develop as well. But at that time, there wasn't much of governmental interference. I mean, they still have a very strong labor law. So on paper, they have everything that is equivalent to what we will have in Sweden, for example, or any other, well-developed country. But the enforcement of it was absolutely lacking, and the penalties when there was a violation, for example, was lacking, and so on. That is also the reason I would say that a lot of the brands have felt the need of doing this themselves after all of the scandals in the 90s, when they realized that we have an issue here with labor rights. What can we do about it? And then the only kind of solution was that, okay, then we do it ourselves with the factories and the companies that we are working with.
Yeah, absolutely. And that shows that the laws itself don't actually carry any meaning unless they're actually executed properly and they're ensured that people have real accountability. So that's a great point. The last question is, what advice do you have for current and future generations to execute sustainability and traceability within companies, teams, or even just communities?
So yes, I think, I mean, when it comes to consumers, when it comes to like tips and recommendations, I think I would say that, I mean, like everyone says, that of course we need to change our behavior to a more conscious way of purchasing. And like you said, you're looking for a lot of information already, and I think that is fantastic. Excuse me. It's fantastic to hear that your generation is looking for that type of information, and the more we can have that, the more we can like question brands and ask them for information proactively, the more pressure we put on them as well to do better and to disclose the information, be transparent with all of this, and to do more. So I think being conscious in what we purchase, from whom we purchase, and also what we purchase is of course important, because we don't want to. We also want to move away from fast fashion and fast consumption, right? So slowing things down is also an important aspect. When it comes to brands and retailers, I would really say that traceability and transparency into the supply chain, or visibility into the supply chain, is really going to be the key, I believe, in the future, in order to really address where we have the biggest issues and the biggest risk in the apparel and fashion industry. Unless we know where our products are made, we cannot address these risks. So for the ones that haven't started on a traceability journey yet, or haven't started mapping their supply chain and trying to figure out how to trace and track the different purchase orders, and understanding that whole landscape, understanding where the material is coming from, the raw material is coming from, and so on, I think it's high time to start that type of journey. And then what you do with that information in terms of communicating to the consumer, that's another issue in a way. I mean, once you have the information, then you can choose what you want to do with it and who you want to communicate it to and how you want to communicate it. But the first step really is to create the visibility.
Absolutely. And that's 100% true when we talk about gaining the information and making sure that we have all the data from every sector, and then just seeing the way that it's communicated to the public. Like I asked previously about social media, it's totally dependent on the company, and that really only begins with traceability and change management and actually focusing and zeroing in on the issues. And I think working together as a team, not just within companies themselves, but I think as communities, it's a lot for us to take on, but I feel like it is possible, and I feel like this is just where our generation is headed. So that's a great piece of advice that I think our generation could really use, because we all need to take the right steps in terms of fulfilling sustainable development goals, and also just making sure that the goals in itself are sustainable, that we are able to keep them upheld and make sure that people don't abandon them, and making sure there are proper organizations and laws and people in place that actually do ensure that they're carried out. So I want to thank you so much, Anna, for being here. I learned so much, and I have a lot to take away, and I'm definitely going to share your answers with a few friends of mine who were curious about what you had to say about being a part of a large corporation and also now being able to start your own company. So congratulations on everything you've accomplished, and thank you so much for being here. I'll just yield the floor to you for any closing thoughts that you may have.
Thank you, Juhi. Thank you. It was great to be here. It's always good, I think, to talk about these issues. And even though we don't have all of the answers, and we don't know exactly how to do it, and I think we usually end up sometimes in a situation where we, both as consumers and as brands, we don't know what is actually the best way of doing this, what is the best way and the most sustainable way of approaching this. And sometimes I think we find ourselves in a situation where we don't know, because we turn this way and then there is something, then that turns into something bad, or that has a negative effect on something. But the most important thing is progress. I think that I'm a firm believer of progress, of trying things out, failing and then trying again, getting back up and trying again. So, and I also am a firm believer that together we can do it. Sustainability is not a competitive advantage. It's not something we should be competing about or within. We should work together. So I think that is my closing remarks on that area.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you for being here. And we will enjoy this episode when I get to re-listen to it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening today. If this is a topic that is really interesting to you and you want to hear more, we have a bunch of episodes on sustainability within the fashion industry. So I recommend you check out the blog post and the show notes of this episode, where you can find links to further listening, great episodes with changemakers that are making the fashion industry more transparent, more sustainable, and you will love hearing from them if you enjoyed this discussion. So make sure to check that out as well. We have more than 150 episodes. I keep losing track, honestly. There are many, many episodes that you can dive into. But I know sometimes it's hard to start. Like, where should I even start listening? That's usually the first question people ask me when they discover the podcast for the first time. So I just want to give you that offering as well. If you, because that's what I usually tell when I meet people in person and they ask me about the podcast. So if you are not sure where to start or where to continue listening, I know now you're interested in fashion and sustainability, but maybe you have some other interests as well. You know what? Just send me an email to regina@impact.com. Let me know what interests you have. And I know every single one of the episodes we have aired in the past 5 years. I will make sure to put a personalized playlist together for you so that you can start listening to topics that you care about deeply. And I promise you, there will be so many inspiring stories and inspiring people, just like Anna, just like Juhi. And and then you can dive deeper and get to know even more incredible change makers that are making our world a better place with what they do. Thanks so much for listening today, and I talk to you soon. Bye.